Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, high-stakes trip. President Biden holding a series of meetings with leaders in the Middle East, addressing global issues like nuclear weapons and domestic ones like the rising price of oil and gas. We're live in Israel with the concerns the president is expected to bring up with leaders today. Inflation nation, the pressure is on Americans' wallets this morning with the cost of everyday items now its highest in more than 40 years. We'll explain what this means for your budget, how you can save, and whether we're facing a looming recession. New information in the January 6th investigation. After the committee hinted at a possible case of witness tampering, NBC News has now learned former President Trump tried to call a member of the White House support staff who was in talks with the January 6th committee. This morning, what we're learning about the call and what it could mean for a possible criminal investigation. Plus, failing to protect. A new report shows social media sites are not keeping LGBTQ users safe, leaving them vulnerable to a slew of harassment. We'll take a look at what's behind these rising numbers, plus how social media giants are responding. An important conversation we'll have a little bit later in our show. We begin, though, with day 2 of President Biden's trip to Israel. On the schedule this morning, a meeting and then a news conference with the Israeli Prime Minister.
Both leaders discussed security issues, technology, and the war in Ukraine before taking part in a virtual summit with the leaders of India and the United Arab Emirates. Yesterday, the president took a look at Israel's U.S.-supported Iron Dome defense system and a new laser-enabled system called Iron Beam. The president then took part in a Holocaust remembrance service where he met with Holocaust survivors. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell is in Jerusalem for us this morning. We are also joined by Dr. Shibli Telhami. He is the Anwar Sadat Professor for Peace and Development at the University of Maryland and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Good morning to both of you. Kelly, I do want to start with you. We know the president spending this morning meeting with Israel's prime minister. Tell us a little more about what they discussed and what kind of announcements they're expected to make.
Well, this is certainly a full day for the president and the prime minister, and really connecting the two governments that have a long and very important relationship. And so in this case, President Biden is coming to Israel, his 10th visit here, his first as president, meeting a sort of an interim government. And I've asked some of the senior advisors if that is a factor at all. And again, we have heard that no, it isn't, that the relationship is strong, that the conversations have been going on. And it's all those key issues you talked about. Security, the economy, even infrastructure ideas. And by expanding it to include India and the United Arab Emirates, they're also talking about ways to expand how Israel is embedded in the broader Middle East. There are concerns about relationships between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That'll be a big part of the next piece of the president's trip, and trying to find ways to come together on climate and on the economy and a lot of big policy issues. But in many ways, this is a trip where the president gets to show the depth of his knowledge on foreign policy issues and relationships he's had with prime ministers going back to the 1970s in the different roles that Joe Biden had in public life. And it's a real chance to try to strengthen the U.S.-Israeli bond, which is always important, but is sometimes tested by the world we live in. And Iran is one of the big questions when it comes to that. The security of Israel and the United States as Iran continues to try to pursue nuclear weapons. Something Israel does not want to see the United States do is get back into that deal with the Iranians about trying to cap their program and slow it down. That is something that President Biden has tried to do, and it hasn't gotten very far, even though there have been talks for quite some time. So it's an important visit. It's a very busy day for the president. We're here in the room where he will do a press conference with the prime minister at some point coming up, and that'll give us a chance to see a little bit more about what their meetings have produced. Joe?
Kelly, I want to ask you more about Iran, which is, of course, a common adversary, and it was a major area of discussion. The president addressed the issue in an interview with Israeli TV. What did he have to say more specifically?
Well, one of the things that really stood out is the president was specifically asked about the lengths the U.S. would go as a partner and a defense protector of Israel when it comes to Iran's ambitions. And he was very clear that although U.S. policy hasn't changed, he talked about it in some new ways, in a very forceful way to say that military force would be on the table. That's long been the policy, but we don't often hear the president talking about it. And he is concerned that, in fact, Iran poses an ongoing threat to Israel and the broader Middle East and the United States by extension. So here's part of that conversation he had just a couple of days ago in advance of this trip.
I think it was a gigantic mistake for the last president to get out of the deal. They're closer to a nuclear weapon now than they were before. We've laid out on the table, we've made the deal, we've offered it, and it's up to Iran.
You, in the past, said you'll do anything, and you say it again, that you'll ensure Iran would not acquire nuclear weapons. Does that also mean, sir, that you would use force against Iran? Is that what that means, if needed?
That was the last resort, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Last resort is certainly key. That is not trying to ratchet up the potential for conflict directly with Iran, but making clear to Israel, to other countries in this region, and much more broadly to the American people, that the president is willing to make that kind of a stand to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And as he talked about, the program in Iran has gotten stronger in the time since they left the agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, which was also known as the JCPOA. That is the kind of thing the Biden administration hoped to return to, and that just has not materialized. Joe?
Dr. Telhami, I want to bring you in here. A prominent Israeli rights group has put up billboards in Bethlehem saying, quote, "Mr. President, this is apartheid." Amnesty International is also accusing the U.S. of shielding Israel from accountability over alleged human rights violations. The president sounded downbeat yesterday on a two-state solution. Do you think he should do more to address these issues? And what does your research show about America's role in trying to mediate this long-standing conflict?
Thank you. For sure, you know, the Palestinians are not particularly happy about the visit as much, even though he's actually meeting with the Palestinian president, in large part because this trip, of course, is really intended to help Israel. The president said so a couple of times. The Israelis asked him to come in part to help the interim Israeli government, before that the coalition government, to prevent Prime Minister Netanyahu from coming back. Obviously, the U.S. doesn't want the right-wing government to come back. But more importantly, Israel wants America's help in getting what they think is the big prize, normalization with Saudi Arabia, that the Palestinians see as coming at their expense, because they see that taking place without real action toward ending the Israeli occupation that has lasted 5.5 decades. And so the meeting with the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, doesn't really address that issue. And even, you know, presenting aid of $200 million, it's helpful, it's good for humanitarian reasons, but it doesn't address the daily suffering in the Palestinian area. So he faces some pushback. We find that while he gives this explanation that he's probably, in fact, largely doing it for Israel, the democratic politics is somewhere else. The majority of Democrats want him to be even-handed on Israel-Palestine. More people want him to lean toward the Palestinians than toward Israel. More people see him as more pro-Israel than they are. And so when we test on the invocation of Israel as an explanation, we find the disapproval of the trip, which is already high, increases. You know, only a quarter of Americans support the trip. So he struggled trying to explain it beyond Israel. He broadened it in this op-ed that he wrote in the Washington Post, but it really hasn't helped him much in trying to make the case, because in the end, it is more about helping Israel. The Israelis want him to come. None of the other stuff could not be done from Washington, including any negotiations on oil.
Dr. Shibli Telhami, thank you so much for joining us. Also, our thanks to Kelly O'Donnell for helping us kick off our coverage this hour.
Now to the economy and the fallout from the latest inflation report. The consumer price index rose 9.1% in June compared to just a year ago. The numbers sent stocks sliding yesterday, and there are fears that the Federal Reserve could take even more aggressive actions to curb the soaring inflation, now at its highest rate in more than 40 years. Joining us now is Kristen Myers, editor-in-chief of thebalance.com. Kristen, good morning. So help us just put the market reaction into context to this inflation number. How bad is it? What does this latest inflation news mean for the economy overall?
Yeah, so with the Federal Reserve essentially hiking interest rates since back in March, it's largely been expected, okay, when is inflation essentially going to stop rising? When is it going to peak, right? And with yesterday's figures of 9.1%, which was even higher than expected, what this does is it really puts the pressure on the Federal Reserve to be even more aggressive when it comes to hiking those interest rates, which isn't great. It takes a bite out of future profits when it comes to companies, so investors don't necessarily like it. And for folks like you and me that are just going out there and trying to, buy a car or buy a house, it means that it's going to cost us more money. So really slamming the brakes on the U.S. economy is really what the Federal Reserve has to do. And that, of course, raises those fears and those anxieties about a future recession.
Yeah, a lot of people are also worried that less demand, if those interest rates do rise, means less jobs, which is sort of that recipe for a recession. What signs are you looking for to determine if we are actually heading that way? And also, I'm wondering if there's any positive signs that maybe we can avoid the worst.
Yeah, that's such a good question. There really is no one really big indicator, right, of a recession. A lot of folks do look to a gross domestic product, GDP, as perhaps really being that big indicator number. And broadly speaking, when folks see that GDP number has declined for 2 quarters, it's already declined for 1, that a lot of folks say, hey, we're in a recession right now. But it really is a little bit more complicated than that. You're looking at that GDP number. You're also looking for unemployment, for example, to start ticking upward. You start looking for income to start coming down. You're just really looking for a overall slowing of economic growth. But I should say, that is actually what the Federal Reserve wants. It cannot continue to allow the U.S. economy to continue to overheat as it has been, because that's why inflation is now sitting at those 41-year highs. The positive, however, is that, you know what, right now, a lot of folks do have a lot of money. They are in financially strong positions. So even if the U.S. does go into recession, remember, a lot of people do have jobs. That unemployment is at 3.5%. Folks really might be able to weather this storm. It might not last a year like recessions typically do. And if it does go into that recession, a lot of Americans really might be able to handle it.
Yeah, and right now, anyway, the job market is still pretty hot. All right, Kristen Myers, thank you so much. Glad to have you with us.
There are new developments this morning in the investigation into the January 6th insurrection and a case of possible witness tampering. NBC News has learned that former President Trump tried to call a member of the White House support staff who was talking to the House committee that is investigating the Capitol insurrection. That's according to a source familiar with the issue. On Tuesday, committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney revealed that the committee had information that the former president had tried to contact a witness involved in the investigation, but she did not identify who that witness was.
After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us. And this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice.
For more, let's bring in NBC News reporter Julie Sirkin. Julie, good morning to you. So what more can you tell us about this new reporting about who this witness might be, and what would this witness be able to offer to the committee about the call?
Yeah, good morning, Joe. Well, look, this person, like you said, is somebody who was in close support staff to former President Trump, but the members on the panel are hesitant to reveal his name, even privately, because of security concerns. And I should say his or her name. We don't know the identity of this witness, but there is concern because of this call from former President Trump after they spoke to this person, that it could be of some concern if his name or her name is revealed to the public. I want you to take a listen to something Chairman Benny Thompson told reporters when asked if we're going to hear from this person at all. Excuse me. Watch.
Are we going to hear from this witness?
I would doubt it. You know, we're concerned, obviously, about the witness, and we want to put that witness in unnecessary jeopardy.
Is it your opinion that there's enough evidence to say that there was an attempt to intimidate these witnesses?
Well, from my vantage point, it's highly unusual to do that, and that's why we more or less put that in the hands of the Justice Department.
And this was just one missed phone call from the former president?
That's all that I'm aware of.
Reminder, Joe, this person is someone they spoke to after Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, perhaps somebody that could corroborate what she told the panel and told the public. But for former President Trump's part, his spokesperson, Taylor Budowich, responded, saying that Vice Chair Liz Cheney, quote, continues to traffic in innuendos and lies that go unchallenged. So we'll see how this shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, echoing what we just heard from Congressman Thompson there, Vice Chair Cheney said the Justice Department has been made aware of this. So what are they going to be looking at? Do we know?
Yeah, well, look, we know the committee has started to transmit some of their investigative information, including this, of course, to the Department of Justice that is pursuing a separate case and looking into January 6th. We don't know yet, again, what former President Trump tried to tell this person. Again, they didn't answer his call or his messages. But Liz Cheney said they're taking this very seriously. Remember, a few weeks ago, she also left the door open to a criminal referral possibly for the former president. So clearly the committee, while they're conducting this investigation and holding these public hearings that we've been seeing over the last several weeks, the Department of Justice here, the committee wants them to act. They want to pressure them to look into former President Trump and further look into the riot on January 6th.
Julie, let's also talk about Steve Bannon. As we reported earlier this week, the Trump ally reversed course, said he would cooperate with the January 6th committee, but a judge ruled that his change of heart would not delay the start of his trial for criminal contempt after he initially refused the committee's subpoena to testify. Now he is again asking for a delay. What is his argument, especially when you consider a judge has already denied him?
Yeah, look, he tried telling the committee, well, now that former President Trump waived executive privilege, right, for somebody who was only with the administration for so many months in the beginning of the term, he said he will now testify in public. But the committee remains to hold their position, which is we want those documents we requested from Bannon. We don't care for public testimony necessarily. And as far as we know, as recently as last night, the committee has not yet received those documents they were seeking from Bannon. Now, this time, Bannon's lawyer is asking the judge to delay the trial that is supposed to begin next Monday because of what we heard on Tuesday in the committee. And we know Bannon, his previous remarks were played several times, including what he said in a radio show on January 5th. He said things like, all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. That was played over and over again during Tuesday's hearing, but the judge so far has not responded to this request.
Julie Sirkin, thank you so much. Staying on Capitol Hill now, lawmakers are examining the impact of ending Roe versus Wade following a day of impassioned testimony. Yesterday, hearings came as President Biden considers more aggressive action to protect abortion access. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale has more.
But how many? An impassioned day of hearings on the Hill.
The choice lawmakers have is how difficult you will make it for us to exercise our freedom.
Overturning Roe versus Wade was a historic occasion that signals a new beginning for millions of unborn American babies.
Lawmakers spotlighting the realities of post-Roe America.
Even now, health clinics are being overwhelmed. They are on the front lines of a full-blown healthcare crisis.
I cannot overstate how much legal uncertainty and chaos that this Supreme Court has unleashed with this unsound opinion.
This as Democrats in both chambers embark on a legislative blitz on the issue. The House again voting on a bill that would codify access to abortion care as previously protected by the court, as well as safeguards for women traveling over state lines for care and shoring up data privacy.
We have to push back, and I think this is a moment that we as a country have to understand who is fighting for women in this country and our rights and who is opposed to it.
Senate Democrats lack the votes to pass these protections, though, and are still urging the Biden administration to do more, including declaring a public health emergency, which Biden's considering.
Has President Biden done enough?
I cannot say that President Biden has done enough. What we needed to do is what we should have done, or really made an effort to do a long time ago, which was to get rid of the filibuster and then move forward and pass our full agenda.
But even Republicans who want to protect abortion access say no to that.
The balance of power in Congress moves back and forth. Without the filibuster, do we really believe that a different majority would not seek a nationwide ban on abortion and find a way to succeed in enacting it.
As lawmakers continue their debate here, Democrats and the White House urging voters to vote come November.
Ali Vitale, thank you.
To Texas now, where outrage is growing over the police response to the deadly Uvalde school shooting after the release of surveillance footage by 2 Texas media outlets. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins us now from Uvalde. Antonia, good to see you. So I know we're hearing from shooting survivors, from victims' families, community members about what they've now seen in this video. What are they saying?
Good morning, Savannah. The emotions here are high, but they're also at times conflicting because many of the families and communities members here, they were expecting to see this video at a meeting on Sunday morning. And so when it leaked the other night, it came as really a gut punch to a lot of folks, even folks who had been fighting for the release of this video, who have been asking for more transparency consistently over the last 7 weeks. It was really hard for the families here. They were calling each other, saying, avoid Twitter, don't go on Facebook, and avoid turning on your TV, because it was hard for some people to see what's essentially, the last few minutes of their children's, their loved ones' lives. And that's been incredibly hard for people here to process. So some of that anger is directed at the reporters who leaked this video early to report on it. And then for many people, that anger is directed at the actions of the officers that you see in this video. The more than an hour that passes by, the officer that reached for hand sanitizer in the video, the many officers who retreated from the gunman, even though that goes against the guidance to law enforcement. So, people here are really disappointed, but they're also just in utter shock, I would say, right now, Savannah.
Absolutely. Antonia, how are law enforcement officials responding to all this criticism? I think so many people watch this video and wonder, how is it possible that this happened? What are they saying about it?
Well, law enforcement has for a while been fighting, in many cases, the release of this video. And many of them felt like, the expectation was this meeting has been set for Sunday morning and that reporters needed to respect the scheduling of that event. On the other hand, many of the families and, of course, reporters who've been on the ground say that it's been 7 weeks since 19 children and 2 teachers, 2 beloved teachers, were murdered inside the school. And that as these families have been begging for more information, leaks like this have become inevitable to some extent. At a city council meeting the other night, the mayor called the reporters who released the tapes chicken, unprofessional, and there was some tension there. Community members shot back saying, well, do you think the cops are chicken? And so there isn't really a consensus here, but I would say law enforcement was certainly taken by surprise by the release of this video, as everyone here expected that the families would get to see it first on Sunday, but they would also get to, at the same time, receive a report from the House committee that's been investigating this that would give them more information, sort of more background to what they would see when this video came out, Savannah.
And Antonia, I know you mentioned the detail of the hand sanitizer was one of those moments. There was also a moment where one officer, the video showed him checking his phone inside the school, which he was criticized for, but we do have more information on that now. What do we know about him?
That's right. We've been learning a bit more about him. That is, according to a Texas lawmaker named Representative Moody, that is Ruben Ruiz, an officer who was married to Eva Mireles, one of the teachers who was murdered by the gunman. And according to that lawmaker, Eva had reached out to her husband, letting him know that she had been shot and that she was dying, and that officer, of course, had a reaction and eventually had his gun taken from him and was escorted off of the scene. I should note that that's not what we see in the video that's been released thus far, but there's more body cam video apparently that we may eventually get to see, and there is more coming in the report that the House committee is expected to release this weekend, first to the families and later to the public. So there's more about Ruben, the officer, and what happened that day on scene that we expect to learn. But certainly the information from that lawmaker gives a little bit more detail to what those officers may have been experiencing while in that hallway and on the ground, Savannah.
All right, Antonia Hilton, thank you so much. Now, search efforts are underway in Virginia this morning with more than 40 people reported missing following severe storms and heavy flooding. Nearly 5 inches of rain fell in Buchanan County Tuesday evening, causing severe flooding, landslides, and power outages in the area. Several homes were swept off their foundations, and cars and trucks were destroyed. So far, no deaths or injuries have been reported.
More Let's Get a Check on your morning news now weather.
Which means Michelle Grossman joins us here in studio. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. Yeah, that's just
the power of water, how quickly it moves in. It was 6 inches of rain really, really quick. And we're hoping that those people are unreachable, not truly missing. So we're going to find that out in the next couple of days, I'm sure. But we're taking a look at dangerous heat today. We're looking at heat alerts once again. We have two big weather stories. The heat continues to be the big weather story. Then we were watching the chance for some really heavy rain along the Gulf Coast. We could see some flash flooding as well. So 17 million people impacted today from the northern plains to the central plains, the southern plains, even parts of the west. And that's because we are continuing to see temperatures into the upper 90s. You've factored humidity. It feels warmer than that. We're also looking at triple digits. So these are some of the temperatures we're seeing today. A big part of the nation under really warm temperatures. 103 in Dallas today. It's going to feel like 108. We'll feel like 108 also in San Antonio. Temperatures back to the west really warm too. Salt Lake City 99, Denver 98 degrees, Phoenix 111, and El Paso 98 degrees. That heat stays in place tomorrow. So the problem is we're not getting any relief, and we won't be getting any relief for some time because we have this big area of high pressure in place. It's not budging, and that's why we're getting this heat pump of air in. So for tomorrow, we're looking at temperatures once again into the 90s. Notice Minneapolis, so far north, 88 degrees. You factor in that humidity, it'll feel like 94, 95 in Denver, 101 once again in Dallas, and temperatures in the triple digits in Phoenix and also for many parts of Dallas. Now, as we go into next week, notice the temperature is still really warm. That high pressure stays in place. So by Monday in St. Louis, we're near 90 degrees. Into Omaha, temperatures in the 90s. Oklahoma City, triple digits. Same story in Dallas. So this is going to be a story that we're going to continue to talk about for quite some time. A lot of cities in Dallas have already broken their all-time hottest summer records. So for the rest of the country today, again, that big story is the warmth. We're looking at some storms along the Gulf Coast, a couple storms in New England. Otherwise, it's a warm day in the Northeast, but we're dry, and we're looking at temperatures into the 90s in some spots. This is what it looks like on radar. We're watching summer downpours. Again, we saw that story in Virginia where we could see a lot of rain in a short amount of time. That causes a lot of problems. So we're looking at some flooding along the Gulf Coast. We could see up to 3 to 5 inches of rain in some spots, guys.
All right. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle, as always.
If you're traveling to Europe, a warning. Airports there are struggling to keep up with the demand for summer travel, and thousands of customers are suffering as a result. NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea takes a closer look at the reasons behind the travel chaos and how airports are responding.
At Europe's airports, a summer of chaos. Hours-long security lines, flights delayed and canceled.
We were stranded, 2 young children. What do you do?
Mountains of lost luggage. It's so bad, London's Heathrow is taking drastic action. The latest airport telling airlines to cap summer ticket sales. Heathrow says it can only handle 100,000 outgoing travelers a day. A fellow passenger sent Jamie O'Grady this picture of his bag, still stuck at Heathrow 5 days after he returned to the U.S.
I've never seen anything like that before. I've traveled all around the world for business and for pleasure.
Other travelers report they haven't received their bags for weeks. And it's not just Europe. In the U.S., claims for lost, damaged, delayed, or ripped luggage are up 135% over last year, according to the most recent figures. Baggage complaints against U.S. and foreign airlines up a whopping 619%. Today, Delta announced a $735 million quarterly profit. The airline canceled nearly 5,000 flights in May and June.
We pushed too hard, and we scaled back a bit.
Airlines and airports are promising to do better. Experts say the main reason for the chaos is staffing shortages. Their advice, if you're traveling, use tracking devices like AirTags in your luggage, or better yet, don't check your bags at all.
Kelly, thanks. Today, the trial for WNBA star Brittney Griner is set to resume in a Russian courtroom 1 week after she pleaded guilty.
Yeah, Griner, who's an 8-time All-Star and WNBA champion, has been detained in Russia since February after officials say they found vape canisters with cannabis oil in her luggage at an airport in Moscow. For more, we're joined by NBC News reporter Matt Bodner in London. Matt, good morning. So Griner already pleaded guilty here. So what can we expect at today's appearance and what comes next?
Savannah, Joe, good morning. So, yes, this is the third hearing in this trial. Obviously, last week she did plead guilty. They're still going to follow a bit of a process, though, before we reach a verdict. So today we're expecting the defense to provide some witness testimony because now the legal team's strategy is to pursue leniency. Of course, you'll remember last week she admitted guilt but said her intention was not to commit a crime. They're really hoping that some recognition of her public outreach work in Russia, for example, will kind of help get a lower sentence. Typically, these are prosecuted to the maximum in Russia. So we're going to hear from defense witnesses today, not necessarily expecting Griner herself to appear. And we do understand that the U.S. Embassy is attending this hearing as well. And it's just starting to get underway now. So we will continue to monitor. As for next steps, we're going to see at least one more hearing that will probably be the judge questioning Griner. And then just based on how these Russian court processes usually go, I think that we'll see probably a fifth hearing, and that could be a verdict and a sentencing. So still a few more steps for Griner on this one.
Matt, NBA star LeBron James has joined a chorus of people who've been critical of efforts to try and free Griner, saying more needs to be done. What is the White House saying ahead of today's appearance, especially with all that criticism?
So we haven't actually seen too much new from the White House on this since last week. Obviously, they made a very big push calling for Griner's release. But I think that the strategy now from Washington appears to be to wait for this process to play out. The Russians have been very clear that they're not going to talk about anything until the court has reached a verdict. So it definitely looks as if they're taking a little bit of a step back right now while we wait for the judge to make a verdict, possibly several weeks from now.
There's been some speculation that Griner could be involved in a prisoner swap. It's one of sort of the ways that people have said they could see this ending. Have there been any hints from either Russia or the U.S. on that front?
Definitely. I think Russia has never been exactly subtle about what it's doing with some of these trials and some of these detentions. But we did hear from the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, this morning, who is kind of lashing out at the public pressure that's emerged around this trial, saying that it's really a futile effort to try to influence the Russian court process, and that the United States, if it wants to talk about anything related to Griner or other detained Americans in Russia, need to go through established channels. So she's kind of echoing what we heard from Russian officials last week before the hearing. So they're playing that game. They're going to insist that there's nothing to talk about until a verdict is reached. Once that happens, I think that we might see a lot of action. Really, the big kind of hesitation has always been from the U.S. on prisoner swaps with regards to these U.S. detainees in Russia. Obviously, we've seen the U.S. start to come around to this because we saw Trevor Reed traded just a few weeks ago. So that's, I think, what we're going to be looking for once a verdict is reached.
All right, Matt Bodner, thank you.
A concerning new report is shining a light on the severity of online harassment directed at the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, according to the advocacy group GLAAD, all social media platforms are failing to protect LGBTQ users. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok, you can see right there, all scored below 50% on the group's safety index card, it's called.
NBC News Out reporter Joe Yerkeba joins us now with more on this. Joe, good morning to you. So first of all, help us understand why LGBTQ users are facing such a large amount of harassment as of late, and what kinds of harassment are people experiencing?
Good morning. So LGBTQ people have always faced more harassment online, and research tells us that they're actually more likely than any other marginalized group to report harassment. But there's been a recent increase in it due to the rise of rhetoric like groomer and pedophile. And those are two terms that the right and some Republican officials have started using to criticize LGBTQ inclusive school curriculums, for example, or drag story hours at libraries. And trans people in particular are facing a disproportionate amount of harassment right now, including misgendering and dead naming, which means intentionally referring to them with the wrong pronouns and name. And dealing with that online all the time can have really negative impacts on people.
So, Joe, I want to go a little bit deeper into this study and look at some of these numbers. 66% of LGBTQ users face what they're categorizing as severe harassment in the last 12 months. What exactly constitutes severe harassment? And I think a step further than that, and more importantly, what impact does that have on users?
Yeah, so severe harassment includes physical threats, sustained harassment, stalking, sexual harassment, doxing, which means revealing someone's address or other personal information online, and that one can be really dangerous for personal safety, or swatting, which refers to falsely reporting an emergency to dispatch armed police officers to someone's address. And all of this can have really negative impacts. So according to the Anti-Defamation League, some people who experience this kind of harassment said they changed their commute they took self-defense classes or avoided being alone at any time to reduce risk to their physical safety. Some had trouble sleeping. So in some cases, this harassment has a really severe impact on just how people live their lives.
So, I mean, Joe, how are these social media platforms responding to this report? And what are the steps that really can be taken to try and make sure the LGBT community is at least safer on social media?
Sure, yeah. So all of the social media platforms except for Twitter responded to requests for comment and said that they're always working with civil rights groups to make their platforms safer for LGBTQ users. And Twitter and TikTok in particular have banned misgendering and dead naming against trans people, but GLAAD is still calling on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to do the same. And GLAAD said that policies to protect trans people are especially important right now, given the surge over the last 2 years in anti-trans legislation, which has also led to a surge in trans people being harassed online. So GLAAD says that these platforms can definitely do more.
Joe Yerkeba, important reporting. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Welcome back. So we're not only feeling the heat in this country this summer. In Europe, a heat wave is sending temperatures spiking to 90 degrees and above in Portugal, Spain, and southern France.
And in China, officials have issued red alerts, the highest in their heat wave warning system. They've seen temperatures over 100 degrees, and it is turning deadly, with hospitals reporting patients dying of heat stroke. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us now. So, Claudio, how long is Europe's heat wave expected to last, and what are the cities that are being hit the hardest?
Hey guys, well, Italian meteorologists have got a tradition, a habit of giving heat waves names. The previous one, a couple of weeks ago, was called Karen, like the ferryman of the damned. Guess what this one is called? The Apocalypse. And that should tell you how hot they expect it to be in the next few days. It's hot already here in Rome. It's heating up. It's going to get to 110 degrees, not only in Rome, but all over the country in Italy. There are a few things that we can do in places like Italy. As you can see to my left, there's a little drinking fountain. A lot of people drink from that. There's a fountain behind me. People can't jump in it, but a lot of people do anyway. And then there's a gelateria right next to me. But in all seriousness, of course, this heat wave is causing a lot of problem all across the country. Now, combine this unusual heat with a drop in the levels of snow and rain throughout the winter. And what you get is a very severe drought, the worst drought in 70 years here in Italy. What does that mean? Well, dry rivers, dry lakes, dry reservoirs, no water in crops and fields. And also that will affect much loved Italian products, of course, like wine, rice, olive oil, tomato, you name it, guys.
And I know that heat wave is sparking fires actually in Portugal and Spain. What's the latest there?
Well, that's right. That's also about 110 degrees all across Spain, all across Portugal, 115 actually in some parts of Portugal. That has caused widespread wildfires, both in Spain and in Portugal. One of them in Portugal required 3,000 firefighters and 60 planes to put it off. The situation is also pretty bad all across other parts of Europe. France today, for instance, is National France Day, Bastille Day. They celebrate every year the fall of the fall of the monarchy with a lot of fireworks planned throughout the country. They had to cancel many of those fireworks because they didn't want people to, stand there in crowds under this massive heat. Belgium also affected, Germany, the Netherlands, you name it. This heat wave is affecting the whole of Europe, guys.
Yeah, and not just that, we also mentioned China's heat wave turning deadly, with hospitals reporting patients dying of heat stroke. What more can you tell us about what's happening there?
Absolutely. This is more like a worldwide heat wave. China is hit pretty bad. We hear that there are several people who died due to the heat wave. As you know, heat waves affect mainly the elderly and those who have pre-medical conditions. At the same time, there are 84 cities all across China that have risen the alerts to the highest level due to the heat wave. To make it worse, in cities like Shanghai, now they have mass testing going there for COVID-19, and a lot of people queuing up in front of these testing centers under the sweltering heat, guys.
Wow. All right, Claudio, stay cool. 110 today where you are in Rome. Thanks for being out there for us.
Let's keep talking about the climate with Climate Control, our weekly series on environmental headlines and solutions. First up, a new study examines the global economic impact of greenhouse gas emissions.
Plus, here's that one we teased, to look at the superworm that can survive on styrofoam, and scientists believe it could help solve the garbage crisis. Our friend NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns has more.
Well, this week's Climate Control begins with a harsh reality. The richest nations in the world not only have the highest emissions, but those emissions are inflicting significant monetary damage on other nations. The study by Dartmouth University calculated the economic damage caused to other countries by the highest emitters. Well, the United States, historically one of the highest emitters, is estimated to have caused almost $2 trillion worth of damage. China is right behind with the U.S., then Russia, India, and Brazil round out the top 5. Now, this study highlights how the wealthiest nations are causing climate to change the fastest, but are mostly untouched by the consequences of our warming planet. Nations in the global north, such as Russia, Canada, and Northern Europe, have actually benefited from warmer winters. But island nations in the South Pacific and already hot nations are struggling the most with crop losses and rising sea levels. Well, now that we've hit the halfway mark in the year and also the halfway mark in our summer, it's a good time to take a look at where we stand with billion-dollar weather disasters. We have had them scattered from the northern plains all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Most of them are severe weather event related. We've had 9 events total this year. Now, the yearly average right around is 8 total. We've already had 9, and we're only at the halfway mark. So if we take where we are right now to where we should be, this is the 5th highest. So we've had a couple years with a little more up to this point, and a lot will depend on the hurricane season to see how bad it gets. And if you remember back to 2020 and 2021, in those years, we had 20+ billion-dollar weather disasters both years. And that has never happened before, and we are on pace to almost get there again. And here it is by decade, just to show you how much the climate is changing. And these numbers have been adjusted for inflation, too. Last decade, we had 128, and already in the 2.5 years, we've had 51, so you get the idea. Well, our final stop on climate control will first require you to put down any food you are eating, especially if you have a queasy stomach. Meet the superworm who can survive by eating styrofoam. Yes, a worm can eat just styrofoam and survive. Now, the larval stage of the darkling beetle, when left only with styrofoam, nothing else to eat, it ate it, it gained weight, and it completed its life stages into an adult beetle. Now, it's unlikely we'll ever see an industrial recycling center with thousands of these worms eating your styrofoam, but the scientists do plan to study these superworms' stomach enzymes in hopes that they can recreate a similar chemical breakdown to get rid of this hard-to-recycle plastic. Well, the UN says we produce 400 million tons of plastic waste every year, and if you want a visual on that, that's 80 million elephants worth of garbage. I hope that helps.
Oh, my goodness. All right, Bill, thank you so much. It's pretty cool.
We need a lot of worms.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I've done beach cleanup, styrofoam is the big issue, so that's cool to see. All right, now some business news. Netflix is getting ready to start showing commercials.
NBC's Contessa Brewer joins us with that and other business news. Hey, Contessa.
Hi, Savannah. Hi, Joe. Good morning to everybody. Netflix is choosing Microsoft to help deliver ads for a cheaper version of its streaming service that expected to launch later this year. Netflix has been commercial-free, of course, for 15 years, but the company announced in April it would create an ad-supported option after reporting its first loss of subscribers in more than a decade. Netflix has not announced what it's going to cost to have these new ad-supported services. Panasonic has chosen Kansas as the site for a new $4 billion electric vehicle battery plant. Panasonic is a major supplier for Tesla, and the governor of Kansas says that this factory would create as many as 4,000 direct jobs. Other battery makers have announced plans to invest in U.S. manufacturing this year as well. In fact, LG is teaming up with General Motors in Michigan. Fiat Chrysler's parent Stellantis and Samsung are planning a factory in Indiana. And DoorDash is raising the bar on the minimum orders for its subscription service, DashPass. A company spokesperson says it will affect convenience, drugstore, and liquor store orders. DashPass subscribers right now pay $9.99 a month for free delivery and lower service fees, but currently they have to order at least $12 in groceries, in food, or $30 in groceries. TechCrunch reports that starting August 12th, those minimum orders may increase, but it may also vary by store, by city, by time of day. So there might be other options around it. We'll watch that.
That sounds like a pretty good deal. I always get the offer, try that, and I'm like, no, because I don't want to subscribe to anything, but free delivery.
Try it out. You never know.
I never really realized that.
All
cool.
right, Contessa, thank you. We're back with an unusual detainment at Boston's Logan Airport. Now, this story centers on this cat, appropriately named Rowdy. The 4-year-old frisky feline was found yesterday morning after escaping her kennel during a cargo transfer back on June 24th. Airport workers spent nearly 3 weeks searching for the lost cat, even using cameras and safe release animal traps. Well, there were some sightings, and the end officials say it was Rowdy who, quote, let herself be caught. Vets say Rowdy is in good health, just a little hungry, a little tired. Rowdy's overjoyed owners will pick her up and take her home to Florida later this week. So happy ending there for Rowdy.
I think I just want to hear you say frisky feline a few times fast.
Frisky feline.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.